Hi, everyone. Hope you had a good weekend. So we are flying fast here. So already in week 9, so we're past midterm at this point. And so as you can see from our homepage, we are now officially in Unit 3. And the focus of Unit 3 is assessing your position as a reader. So let's take a look at the overview. So it's quite possible that the students and the instructor, for that matter, are not part of the author's intended audience. In order to become active readers, then students must be able to assess their own position as readers. Students are inclined to think that all of the authority on a particular topic or issue lies with the author. If we can get the students to understand the author's biases and projected audience, we can then show them that they too have some authority in whatever is under discussion. So use this unit to show students how what they learn from understanding the text and finding the assumptions can be used critically to to engage with the text by drawing on their own areas of expertise, their perspectives, or the perspectives or terms of the other texts, right? Putting those texts into a conversation. Okay, and so, right, what is being emphasized here is how Unit 3 builds off of Unit 2. And so first, right, understanding the text. So that was the focus of Unit 1, and finding the assumptions, that's Unit 2. And as we discussed, one of the most important assumptions that a writer makes is about their intended audience, so their target audience. So of course, every writer wants as broad of an audience as possible, right, to reach as many readers as possible. But within that larger readership, they have in mind a very specific, sometimes more specific than other times, a target audience that they most want to reach and persuade of their argument, right? So whose views or opinions on the topic that the writer is exploring does the writer most want to change, right? And why? And so when we identify, then looking at particular words and choices, right, we looked at writers' uses of we, you, our, right? So who do they mean when they use those kinds of words? Once we identify then the target audience, then we think about what assumptions does the writer make about that audience, right? What does the writer assume that they value? What are their viewpoints, right? How might they be responding to the writer's argument or a piece of evidence, right? How does assuming the reader's viewpoint help determine what kinds of evidence that that writer uses? And I think this is important for Varagur, right? So we're going to look at the kinds of evidence that she uses and think about, why she's chosen that kind of evidence, right? Why might that evidence in particular persuade her intended audience the most? Um, Okay, and then once we figure out the intended audience and the assumptions being made about that intended audience, then we're at Unit 3. We're positioning ourselves as readers in relation to that intended audience. So are we a part of that intended audience, and how can we tell? And if so, what effect does that have on us as readers in terms of our understanding of the text, how persuaded we are by the argument of the text? And if we're not part of that intended audience, how does that affect our reading? Right? Are we still able to gain any value from the text if we're not part of that more narrow intended audience? Okay, so our goals. So identify the intended audience and practice active reading by assessing a personal reaction to the text. So if you think back to the beginning of the semester when we were talking about active reading strategies, that was one form of annotation that we made to the text, right? Kind of tracking our personal response to that text, right? Where are we feeling most persuaded by the argument of the text or most interested, or where are we feeling maybe resistant, and why might be feeling resistant, right? And that can be the stepping off point to developing a critical and original argument, right? So if you are resisting, thinking about why you're resisting, and whether you are outside or inside of that target audience, you might be able to think about what perspectives the writer might not be taking into consideration, blind spots in their argument, right? Or if they're assuming something about their intended audience and you are part of that intended audience, what if those assumptions aren't correct, actually, right? So based on your own experience, maybe they aren't correct. And so thinking through your response to the text, again, is a great stepping stone toward being able to critique the argument in the text or the approach that the writer takes to proving or supporting that argument. Okay, and all of which is going to be really important when we shift to Unit 4 and we begin interpreting the text as a whole, thinking about how all of these different units, all of these different elements that we've been focusing on, pull together to help generate the overall meaning or argument of the text. Okay, so if we come back, so here we are under week 9. And so today then, within this frame, we are going to be going over Varagur, the group work we did on Varagur, previewing those 3 paragraphs, right? And those paragraphs are really important in a way. They serve as the kind of core, the conceptual core of the argument, right? So kind of sandwiched between her 2 paragraphs, we have that paragraph that is a quotation from Foucault, right? So basically, Varagur is working with Foucault's notion of discipline, right? And again, Varagur kind of sets that quotation up indirectly, right? Kind of implying what Foucault's notion of discipline has to do with the skincare regimen that she's focusing on. And so that was the focus of the group work in large part. And that notion of discipline is going to be really important because that in many ways is going to serve as the connection that we're able to make to our next text. And it's a challenging concept, this notion of discipline. So we want to make sure we spend a good deal of time breaking that down and thinking about how that informs Vargur's argument. Okay, and so today you've read the full article. So the follow-up that we're going to do after we review the group work you did last week is going to be taking a look at 4 more passages from the text and thinking about how those passages help to more fully and specifically define the intended audience for Vargur's article, and also thinking about what's the larger argument here. And this is what the grading criteria calls the broader stakes and implications of the argument, right? So in other words, here Varagur is focusing on skincare and this new skincare in particular, right? That involves kind of wounding the skin, right? There's a certain violence that's taking place there. And so certainly the argument then has to do with skincare, but it also has to do with something bigger. There's a bigger picture here. And so we'll also kind of shift over to address that larger picture and meaning. And I think, addressing that larger meaning helps us think about, okay, so if we are not part of the writer's intended audience, right, that more specific audience that they are defining for themselves, part of how we can still gain meaning or gain something at least from the argument has to do with its larger implications, right? So for Vargur's article specifically, again, that means, okay, this is about skincare, but it's also about more than skincare, right? So finding out what it's about beyond skincare is going to be the key to how we might kind of connect with that text. Okay. And so just a reminder, the video activities are due for today as well. So that was the midterm poll, the checklist, and the 2 examples of strong writing. And so for the midterm polls, so I took a look at those and it looks like we are just where we need to be. So it seemed like most people were pretty comfortable with the midterm, that the questions there and the text weren't particularly surprising. And so most of us felt that it was as you expected. A few people thinking it was a little easier, a few people thinking it was a little more difficult. So that's a good sign. And so I'll have those midterms graded soon. So we'll be able to talk about that more fully. And the examples of strong writing. So again, the first example was that full essay, and it demonstrates that nice, strong, controlled structure that is the hallmark of a B essay. And that strong structure is created in large part thanks to clear topic sentences that are statements of analysis that tie into the prompt, right? And that's really key. And then those topic sentences are integrated, right? The main ideas and the connecting concepts from those topic sentences are integrated into the thesis so that the thesis offers a clear roadmap for the ideas that are going to be explored in the essay. Okay, and then the second one was an example of really strong connective work. And so we use that again to emphasize how important it is to pull out or requote words or phrases from the quotations. And so pulling them out to close read. And this is where we use our dictionary definitions to help inform our close reading, to use that as a brainstorming, which we'll see with our Varagur preview activity. And then also, right, pulling out a particular word or phrase or concept from the first text, that quotation from the first text, dropping it down into the second half of the body paragraph to use it to discuss the quotation from the second text, right? To kind of frame that discussion. And so the writer does that really good here, especially the explanation step of our IC method. So really spelling out that particular connection that's being made using that language pulled down from Gladwell to discuss who and the second act of social media activism. Okay. So we'll come back here to our checklist, and as you'll see, we have a link here, our in-class work. So that's what we're focusing on now. So you can just pull up the Varagur preview assignment, and there's our link to the Google Doc. So you can go ahead and click that. Okay, and then we'll have access to, again, the group work that we did last week. Okay, so first, before we start reviewing, I just want to look forward to our follow-up activity that we're going to be doing for today, this part 2. And so this will be due by the end of the day today. So our instructions, so be sure to take notes during this video review of our group activity, and you want to use those notes to revise your group's responses to this activity above. So making them fuller and more accurate, right? So again, if we think of these group work activities, these Google Docs as in a way kind of study sheets, right, for the quiz, then we want to make sure that those responses are as full and accurate as possible. So again, you want to take notes while we're going through this, and then each member will go back in and try to strengthen the responses that are there. Okay, and then the second half is focusing then on these newer questions based on these 4 new passages. Okay, and so we'll talk more fully about that in the next video. Okay, but I just wanted to emphasize that as we're going through this group work, you want to be taking notes and thinking about how you might improve, go back in and revise and edit to make your responses more strong and accurate. Okay, and so just as a refresher, so this really important passage, as we mentioned, that has this concept of discipline from Foucault that serves as the kind of core concept of the argument. So before you start a militant skincare regimen, it's instructive to think about why you want one and why it seems like an intrinsic good. Discipline consists of various techniques which aim at making the body both docile and useful. The human body becomes a machine, the functioning of which can be optimized, calculated, and improved through the internalization of specific patterns of behavior, wrote the philosopher Michel Foucault, and Discipline and Punish. Don't we all have friends who are fanatical about skincare and don't really, whispers, have great skin? How could that be? It's simple. The end product of a skincare regimen isn't perfect skin, but the regimen itself. Something that, in high American style, you have to steadily escalate over time lest you stagnate. Don't you want to improve? Okay, so some interesting things happening here, certainly in terms of who Varagur means by you. And we'll explore that here as we review the first step of our group work, and then you'll be exploring that more fully as you look at the additional passages that we're going to take a look at for today. Okay, so group one. So this was Seo Ying, Amanda, Paola, Zach, and Ming Hui. So what is the dictionary definition of regimen? Based on the context of the passage, why do you think Varagur uses this term instead of, for example, routine? Okay, so I just want to pause a moment and think ahead toward XPOS, right? So of course we are preparing you um, to be ready for XPOS and to be able to complete that course successfully. And so part of what these questions in these kinds of activities are doing, and also in the reading quizzes, is they're kind of breaking down the critical reading and close reading process for you, right? Breaking it into the kinds of steps you want to make sure you move through every time you're close reading the text. So once you get to XPOS, these steps are not going to be broken down for you like this, right? So in other words, you're not going to have these reading quizzes to walk you through the steps and prepare you for close reading. So again, you know, part of our strategy that we're developing, what we want to get in the habit of doing is when we're close reading, right? And we've looked at a quotation and we've decided, right, okay, this word in particular or this phrase is important for what I want to do with the quotation, right? Maybe the connection I want to make using that quotation. And then to help you generate and develop a close reading, look it up in the dictionary, even if you know what the word means, right? And use that as a brainstorming tool. And that will help make your close reading as accurate and as precise as possible, right? And so dictionaries, kind of first step to go. And then second question to ask yourself, okay, so this word that I've decided is important and I want to close read it. Okay, I've looked it up in the dictionary. This is what it means. Okay. And how would the sentence have read differently if the writer had used a different word, right? And so that's the structure of this question. So routine would essentially convey the same meaning as regiment, but why doesn't she use routine? Why go with regimen? Okay, so the response here, so regimen means a systematic plan as of diet, therapy, or medication, especially when designed to improve and maintain the health of a patient. Varagur uses this term instead of routine because the formulation of skincare regimen in modern times is unnecessary. And that's her argument, right? That it's unnecessary. And certainly, you know, perhaps our biggest clue is the title of the article itself, right? The skincare con. So just thinking of the word con itself, right? What are its connotations? Well, if you think of in the sense of pros and cons, well, it's negative. If you think of it in the sense of con artist, right? Or uses the word scam later in the article, right? Right, somehow people are being misled, deceived into thinking that this new skincare regimen is necessary, right? When in fact it is not. Okay, and so regimen, um, again, yeah, the systematic plan, diet therapy, et cetera, especially when designed to improve and maintain the health of a patient, right? So if you think of patient, then we are thinking about the relationship between patient and doctor, right? So in other words, the doctor is prescribing a particular regimen for the patient, right? And so you want to think of the power structure there, right? So the medical professional is in a position of authority to say to the patient, look, these are the things you need to do. This is the particular routine you need to do in order to improve your health, for example. Or if that doctor is a dermatologist, to improve your skin, right? Or a dietitian to improve your diet. And right, so the word routine doesn't carry with it that sense of prescription, right? That this routine basically, right? I could develop my own routine, right? I'm deciding that this is how I want to wash dishes at night. So I'm going to continue to do that, right? So that routine would be coming from me, right? However, regimen, it's a routine prescribed by someone else in a position of authority, right? So that's the shift in meaning is, so she's emphasizing, she's using regimen to emphasize, and notice our close reading verb there, right? So to emphasize that this plan, right, is coming from an outside authority, right? It's being kind of imposed upon us in a way. Okay, so two, based on the context of the passage, why does Varagur use the word militant to describe a skincare regimen? So based on the context from the passage, Varagur uses the term militant because people want to pursue perfect skin and this kind of thing does not exist. Okay, so here we want to make sure that we look militant up in the dictionary, right? So notice here I haven't broken that down for you and told you directly that you want to look up militant in the dictionary, but we're starting to kind of shift toward, okay, let's say we were reading this article in XPOS, right? And you were asked to close read, you wouldn't get these specific instructions, right? So you kind of have to know, okay, take a word out, explore the dictionary definition, generate a close reading, think about how the sentence would read differently if they use a different word. So, so here we want to make sure we use the dictionary definition of militant. And so if we move on to the third question, that kind of gets us closer there. So how does militant add on to the effect created by the word regimen? So the word militant is defined, okay, there, we started going to the dictionary definition, as extreme methods. And this is connected to regimen or healthy lifestyles, since to have a proper skincare routine, you need to complete the proper steps. Okay, and right, so militant, it adds on this notion of extremity, right? So already you can see the shift. So routine, okay, that's something I could do for myself, determined by myself. Okay, when we shift to regimen, okay, now we have an outside authority telling us, okay, here's your plan, right? Here's what you need to do in order to be healthy, etc. So this outside authority. And then now militant is really kind of emphasizing this outside authority or this power dynamic, right? Becoming really militant. So if we look that word up again, it also suggests, right, the military. So combat, war. And so militant is adding or emphasizing really the violence that is such a key part of what Varagur defines as the new skincare, right? So actually women are wounding their skin, breaking the skin barrier in pursuit of quote unquote perfect skin. And so militant really, it describes, again, it underscores the violence in that skincare regimen, as well as the kind of discipline, right? So the military is all based on disciplined, it's based on, right, a clear chain of command, right, a hierarchy, a power structure. And so emphasizing this degree of discipline that goes into performing or seeking perfect skin for women, right? Okay, so four, in keeping with quoting a philosopher in the second paragraph of this excerpt, Varagur uses a key term from philosophy, intrinsic good. So do a little Googling and record the distinction that philosophers make between an intrinsic good and an instrumental good. Okay, so the term intrinsic good and instrumental good actually are two very different things indeed. So intrinsic good means that something is valuable in its own way, while instrumental good means something that is worth because it helps to bring out the good. Okay, yeah, so let's keep following up and trying to make that a little more specific. So again, intrinsic good. So for close reading, for analyzing, for active reading of text as you move into XPOS, yeah, dictionary, Google, right? Okay, so intrinsic, you look up intrinsic and you find out it's from philosophy, which makes sense because here comes Foucault, who she tells us, right, that he's a philosopher. She doesn't just leave it up to us to Google him and find that out. She provides that information. So she's emphasizing his status as a philosopher. Um, and so intrinsic good. And so intrinsic good means something holds value just for itself, just for being itself, right? So in other words, okay, a particular human being, right, is an intrinsic good. So that viewpoint would say, okay, that human holds value purely because they are human, right? They are good in and of themselves, right? Their humanistic values and components, right, are what give them value. Okay, so if I think of a particular human as an instrumental good, then I'm valuing that person not for who they are and for their human qualities, but for what they are good for or what I can use them for, right? So let's say I value a particular person because they can provide me with connections to a job I'm interested in, right? So that would be thinking of that person as an instrumental good. And so when Varagur talks about skincare routines, the intrinsic good would be, okay, I value that routine, that regimen, right? That discipline in and of itself, right? I value the discipline as discipline and not for what that particular form of discipline, this new skincare regimen, um, can do for me, right? It's instrumental goal. So, in other words, the instrumental goal of skincare is, well, what's the end goal? Perfect skin, right? And so, part of the argument she's making here, right, is that it's an intrinsic good. So, what Foucault is helping us to understand is that the value is in the act of discipline itself, performing the regimen, right? Internalizing the specific patterns of behavior that define that regimen, right? And that allows us to kind of convey to the outside world, hey, I'm disciplined. Look at how well I'm disciplining myself, right? Um, and that has something to do with this high American style we'll look at when we look at the next group's responses. And so, and it's important too when defining high American style that it escalates over time, right? So it's not that you can just kind of maintain this new skincare regimen and be fine. To kind of, you know, perform discipline in the high American style, quote unquote, you have to step it up, right? You have to continue to improve. So you have to continue to find different skincare regimens, right? Or different exercise routines or different diets. Um, and so as Varagur points out, right, so this new skincare regimen, right, it's different from the regimen we saw before, right? And she uses the example of Kim Kardashian and contouring, right, where it's about a lot of makeup. And so this, right, the new skincare regimen is about doing this and looking natural, but essentially buying or spending a large amount of money to look like you don't have makeup on, right? So it's kind of the opposite. So it's a new fad. And her implication is that, okay, it's a fad, so it's going to go out of style, and then we're going to have a new skincare regimen, right? So it's going to constantly cycle out. And so we want to think of how that ties into her overall message. Okay, so question 5. So based on the context of the passage, who does Varagur seem to have in mind as a target audience when she uses the word you? And what assumptions is she making about you? So those are unit 2 questions, right? So finding the assumptions. And one of, again, the most important assumptions a writer makes is about their intended audience, their target audience. So based on the context of the passage, the target audience which Varagur has in mind when using the phrase you in a quotation, don't you want to improve, are the people who are insecure with their skin and want an enhancement. Okay, exactly. So the people who are interested in this new skincare regimen, right? Because here, before you start a militant skincare regimen, so wanting to capture people who might be tempted to start this new extreme militant skincare regimen where it's all about doing this and, right, scientific products, right? That have acids and peptides, et cetera, she says. And so before you do that, she wants to catch people before they engage in this regimen. So it's instructive to think about why you want to do it, right? And why it seems like an important good. And so she's indicating that, okay, Foucault can help us determine why we want to do this and why it seems like a good in itself. Okay, and then here, don't we all have friends? And so this phrase is so important here, right? We all. So it's not even just we, but we all. So she's making this big assumption that all of her intended audience members would share, right? All of her readers. So don't we all have friends who are fanatical about skincare, and don't really whisperers have great skin? So in other words, right, friends who are fanatical about skincare. So that suggests, right, that the target audience is not specifically people who are already fanatical about this new skincare regimen, right? It's not the people already performing militant discipline on their bodies so that they have dewy natural skin by using lots of expensive serums. But it's these people who, right, might be tempted to start this kind of regimen, and she wants to catch them before they do, to let them know, as we know from her article, from the title of her article, that this is a scam, it's a con, right? To keep them from being won over into participating in this regimen. Okay, so we'll pause there, and in our next video, we'll pick up with group 2. Okay, I'll see you soon.